October 25th, 1415. The muddy fields near a small French village called Agincourt, under the relentless rain. 6,000 exhausted, hungry, and sick English soldiers stare at the horizon. What they see freezes their blood. 30,000 French knights and soldiers, armed to the teeth, ready to slaughter them. This is no ordinary battle. This is a story of one of the most uneven confrontations in medieval history. A battle that, by all the rules of war, the English should have lost. And yet, in the next few hours, the fields of Agincourt will become a nightmare of mud, blood, and steel. Thousands of French nobles, the cream of European chivalry, would die in ways so brutal that chroniclers would barely dare to describe them. How could a starving army outnumbered 5-1 achieve the impossible? What tactical secrets did Henry V use to achieve victory? And why did this battle forever change the way wars will be fought for centuries? Today we will unravel all the secrets of Agincourt, the most improbable military victory of the Middle Ages. To truly understand the magnitude of what happened at Agincourt, we need to step back. The year is 1415 in Europe is plunged into what would later be known as the 100 Years' War, an endless conflict between England and France for control of the French throne. In England, a young king has just ascended to the throne, Henry V, barely 28 years old. Many underestimated him, a mistake that the French would pay for in blood. Henry was not an idealist. He was a cold strategist and a charismatic leader who needed a victory to consolidate his power. He had inherited a divided kingdom and a rebellious nobility. He needed to unite England under a common cause, the conquest of France. In August 1415, Henry V landed in Normandy with 12,000 men and besieged the city of Harfleur. Victory came, but at a terrible price. Dysentery struck the English army. Thousands died or were too weak to fight. With winter approaching and his army reduced by half, Henry made a decision that many considered suicidal. Instead of returning to England, he marched toward Calais, a port controlled by the English 160 miles away. What Henry didn't know was that the French army, thirsty for revenge and several times more numerous, was blocking their path. The English were marching into a trap, or so the French thought. Let's now analyze the two armies that would meet in this impending catastrophe. The French had everything in their favor. 30,000 men against barely 6,000 English. Among them, 10,000 knights in heavy armor, the military elite of the time, men who had trained all their lives for war. The French nobles were so confident in their superiority that they argued about who would have the honor of capturing the English king. Marshal Boucicaut even ordered cages prepared for prisoners before the battle began. If English archers were to fall from the sky, we would not fear them even then. On the other hand, the English army was a shadow of what it had been. After weeks of forced marching in the rain, with shortages of food and drinking water, many suffered from dysentery. Their emaciated faces and muddy uniforms contrasted dramatically with the shine of French chivalry. But they had three crucial advantages: their king, their archers, and their desperation. Henry V, unlike the French commanders, was a leader who shared hardships with his men. He slept among them, ate the same food, and knew many by name. And then there were the English archers, the secret weapon that the French considered unchivalrous but deadly effective. Each could fire up to 10 arrows per minute with their powerful longbows, capable of piercing armor at 200 meters. Finally, the English knew there was no possible retreat. They were trapped in enemy territory, outnumbered and without supplies. They had only two options: victory or death. As it's often said, there's nothing more dangerous than a cornered enemy. The night of October 24th was a prelude to the hell that would come. Rain fell incessantly on the field of Agincourt, turning the ground into a quagmire. In the French camp, the atmosphere was festive. Knights drank wine, played dice, and boasted of the feats they would perform the next day. Many were already counting the ransom they would collect for their English prisoners. Our nobles bet on how many prisoners each would take, and played dice for the ransom of the English king, as if they already had him in their power. Meanwhile, in the English camp reigned a sepulchral silence. The soldiers, aware of their desperate situation, prepared for what many consider their last day on earth. Knights dictated their wills. archers sharpened their stakes and checked their bowstrings, protecting them from rain. Henry V did not sleep. The young king walked among his troops, talking to them, encouraging them, reminding them why they fought. At one point, he disguised himself with a simple cloak and listened to the conversations of his men, taking the pulse of the army. What Henry heard that night broke his heart. Men saying goodbye to their friends, sending messages to their families, praying for a miracle. But he also saw something the French didn't have: the fierce determination of those who have nothing to lose. At dawn, Henry gathered his captains and revealed his plan. A plan so bold it bordered on madness. A plan that would change history. As the sun tried to peek through the gray clouds, Henry V demonstrated why he would go down in history as one of the great military strategists. The terrain chosen for battle seemed like a death trap for the English, a narrow field flanked by dense forests which favored the larger army. However, Henry saw what the French did not. That narrowness also limited the French ability to deploy their full strength. Henry established his position with millimetric precision. His first action was revolutionary. He ordered the archers to drive sharpened stakes into ground, pointing toward the enemy, creating a lethal barrier against cavalry charges. Then he organized his army into 3 compact divisions of men-at-arms, protected on the flanks by the feared English archers, forming what historians would later call an inverted wedge formation. But the most brilliant element of his plan was psychological. Instead of waiting for French attack, Henry ordered his outnumbered army to advance toward the enemy. "We advance! May God and St. George guide us." This decision stunned the French. The sight of such a small army marching directly toward them bewildered them. Was it courage or madness? The English stopped within arrow range, and Henry gave the order that would change the course of the battle. "Archers, draw your bows." What followed was a demonstration of why the English longbow was the most feared weapon in Europe. Imagine the sky darkening, not from clouds, but from the shadow of thousands of arrows flying at 150 miles per hour. The English archers, each capable of firing 10 arrows per minute, unleashed hell upon the French lines. In a matter of seconds, more than 5,000 arrows fell upon the bewildered French. The arrows fell like snowflakes in winter, as if a dark cloud had burst upon us. The French knights in heavy armor were relatively protected, though many horses were struck down, creating chaos in their ranks. But for the less protected infantry, it was a massacre. Furious at this affront, the French commander made the fatal mistake. He ordered a cavalry charge. Montjoy, St. Denis, for France an honor. What the French didn't understand was that Henry V had been waiting for exactly that. Thousands of knights charged across the muddy field, gaining speed, their armor gleaming under the weak sunlight, an impressive and terrifying sight. But then, the field, soaked by days of rain, became a death trap. The heavy French horses began to sink into the mud, losing momentum, falling, creating obstacles for those coming behind. And they're waiting with the sharpened stakes of the English archers. The first knights to reach the English lines encountered a wall of stakes, horses and riders impaled, screaming in agony, creating a barrier of twisted flesh and metal. And as the French charge disintegrated into chaos, the English archers continued firing, now at point-blank range. What had begun as a glorious charge turned in minutes into a death trap. With the French cavalry decimated, now came the real test, the clash of infantries. The French men-at-arms advanced heavily across the field, dodging their fallen comrades. Their armor, which on dry ground gave them an advantage, now became their worst enemy. Each step in the deep mud consumed vital energy. Exhausted even before reaching the English lines, the French crowded into the narrow battlefield. They were so tightly packed that many could not raise their weapons to attack. They were so pressed together that the living could not advance over the dead, nor the healthy help the wounded. What followed was one of the most brutal scenes of medieval warfare. The English, formed in disciplined lines, began to methodically massacre the French trapped in the mud. The English archers, having exhausted their arrows, joined the fray with axes, hammers, and improvised swords. These men, considered low class by the French nobles, proved to be ruthless killers in hand-to-hand combat. As more and more French fell, Those coming behind stumbled over the corpses of their countrymen. Some knights, due to the weight of their armor, drowned in just a few inches of mud mixed with blood. The field of Agincourt became a swamp of death. The screams of the dying, the clash of metal against metal, the smell of blood and entrails, witnesses would later describe scenes so horrible they would make the devil himself weep. 2 hours after the start of the battle, a moment occurred that would strain Henry V's nerves to the limit. A group of French knights managed to break through the English lines and attack the camp, where the baggage and noncombatants were. Simultaneously, a rumor spread that a French force was attacking from the rear. Henry, fearing the collapse of his fragile victory, then made the most controversial decision of the battle. Let each man kill his prisoners. We cannot risk it. The order was clear. Execute the thousands of French prisoners who had already been captured. Even the most hardened veterans hesitated at such an order. Killing a surrendered prisoner violated all codes of chivalry. Many refused to obey, but the fear of a French counterattack prevailed. The English archers, less bound by chivalric codes, began the massacre of prisoners. Hundreds of French nobles, unarmed and surrendered, were executed in a matter of minutes, an act that would taint the English victory and haunt Henry V for the rest of his life. Fortunately for his conscience, the French counterattack never materialized. The rumor was false, but the damage was already done. As the sun began to set over Agincourt, the result was undeniable. An English victory so complete that it defied all military logic. When the last Frenchman fled the battlefield, the magnitude of the catastrophe was exposed. Between 7,000 and 10,000 Frenchmen lay dead, including the cream of French nobility, 3 dukes, 90 barons, and 1,500 knights. Virtually an entire generation of French military leaders wiped out in a single day. The English losses? Barely 400 men. Agincourt was not just a military victory. It was an earthquake that shook the foundations of medieval warfare. It demonstrated that heavy cavalry, which for centuries had dominated European battlefields, could be defeated by well-trained and positioned infantry soldiers. The prestige of the noble knight would never fully recover. For England, Agincourt became a national symbol of pride and determination in the face of impossible odds. Even today, more than 600 years later, it remains an example of how strategy, leadership, and morale can overcome pure numerical force. Henry V returned to England as a hero, his legitimacy as king now unquestionable. Shakespeare would later immortalize his pre-battle speech in one of the most celebrated pieces of English literature. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers. History is full of battles where David defeated Goliath, but few are as dramatic, as improbable, and as consequential as what happened on that rainy day in October 1415. Agincourt reminds us that in war, as in life, the strongest or most numerous don't always win. Sometimes, victory belongs to those who best understand their strengths, the enemy's weaknesses, and have the courage to do the impossible. If this story of overcoming all odds has fascinated you, don't forget to subscribe for more tales of battles that changed the course of history. And let us know in the comments, what other historical against all odds battle would you like us to explore?